This is an RNZ podcast.
This is Mediawatch. I'm Colin Peacock. This week we take a quick look at the extraordinary fall from grace of a man once in line for the throne but now derided as the Duke of Yuck, and an unexpected local angle on that.
Turns out he looks like quite a lot like Prince Andrew. Luckily he's in New Zealand, so it's fine. They don't have the newspapers there.
That's later on. But this week, our focus is on that thorny issue causing increasing angst in the media, the serious slide of New Zealanders' trust in news, journalism, and the media in general. Several surveys in recent years have given us ample evidence of that trend, but the latest one asks Kiwis why they've lost trust and what might get it back. And how to rebuild it is also the focus of a new book by an editor here at RNZ, who sees things in terms of a marriage on the rocks, and we, the media, are the cheating spouse. But what might persuade the people to take us back?
And one of the things that most upset me during that period was the acquiescence of the New Zealand media to her in general, and their journalistic integrity, if it ever existed, got completely and utterly blown up. And they did a study on stories and the favourability of those stories every time Ardern said something, and the blatant bias of the New Zealand media makes you want to weep.
News Talk ZB's Mike Hosking there on his breakfast show last Thursday, sounding off, as he does sometimes, about shortcomings he sees in the media around him. And he annoys some of his peers and even his own colleagues when he does that, but it's a free country and a free media, so fair enough. But what was it that triggered that on-air spray on Thursday? Well, it was a new unauthorised biography of Jacinda Ardern by the journalist David Cohen, who interviewed dozens of people about her for his new book, including Mike Hosking, who later on read aloud from a bit of the book, including Mike Hosking himself complaining about cloying coverage of Ardern when she was Prime Minister.
Adorable was the word, but for some more than others, the country's most popular broadcaster, Mike Hosking, found the display a combination of fascinating and fantastically depressing, because the media, like many of the public, fell in love with her. There's nothing wrong with falling in love, Hosking continues, but when you're a journalist, you've got to put that to one side and cover it in a fair and balanced way. But fairness and balance just went out the window. I've been in this business for 43 years and I've never seen such a large collection of people who had lost the plot completely.
Clearly a sincerely held view there from Mike Hosking, who clearly lost trust in journalists at that point. Though over the years people have said similar things about Mike Hosking himself over his friendly tone in interviews with other Prime Ministers that he clearly liked a lot more, including the current one. And back in 2013, for instance, he even endorsed John Key while he was emceeing the Prime Minister's State of the Nation speech. And the perception of his political bias was such that petitions were launched to take the job of moderating TVNZ's election debates away from him. Now, all that was in the past, and a long time before slumping public trust in news and journalism became the big media issue that it is right now. And last Thursday on ZB, the author of that book, David Cohen, told Mike Hosking about a recent survey that backs that up.
But I would also argue the media's never recovered in terms of credibility in the eyes of the public. Would that be fair?
According to the Massey University Worlds of Journalism survey, the latest one, the fall in New Zealand has been more precipitous than most other comparable countries. So something in addition to technology, social media, and all the rest of it.
Last week, the official broadcasting watchdog, the Broadcasting Standards Authority, published its latest annual report, which said formal complaints for the public for the year were down, and the BSA found only 8 breaches of standards in all year. Not bad. Now, this month, the BSA released another report about public trust in the news. Several surveys in recent years have shown our trust in it sliding significantly and angst about why increasing within the media. But the BSA's online survey and focus groups didn't just add more numbers to the others. They asked people who'd lost trust in it why and what, if anything, might restore it for them. Large majorities told the BSA they wanted news backed by credible evidence, more neutrality, prompt corrections, and more in-depth reporting. Also, more transparency, accountability, and facts distinguished from opinion and advertising. They wanted less clickbait, sensationalism, and aggressive attack-style journalism. Well, so far, so much like many other surveys. But while bias was also cited as a major reason for our slumping trust, respondents also acknowledged that their perceptions of bias were coloured by their personal views and how well they feel their own views are reflected in the media or not. The BSA's conclusion in the end was trust is easier to lose than to regain. But almost 3 in 10 said there was nothing a news provider could do to rebuild that lost trust, though more than twice as many said they could do it. And this week, former New Zealand Herald editor turned scholar and commentator Gavin Ellis seized on that by asking this question.
Why do news outlets continue to exhibit the sort of behaviour that contributes to declining trust when the solutions are so obvious?
Every day, said Gavin Ellis, fact and opinion are mixed together, with the audience finding it increasingly difficult to differentiate, and simply adding the tag analysis to the top of a story peppered with opinion is no answer, he said. And Gavin Ellis also said we see clickbait headlining and story selection all the time, particularly on news sites that use artificial intelligence, algorithms and analytics. And while consumers applied higher trust scores to outlets offering hard news rather than light lifestyle or entertainment content, well, that stuff keeps coming in spades from the mainstream media as well. And while he was at it, Gavin Ellis raised this.
Shouldn't news reporters be off limits for commercially linked stories?
And as if to illustrate that problem, the hosts of TVNZ's 7 Sharp, nominally still a current affairs show, are currently on TVNZ1, actively promoting a foreign commercial startup, not just in the studio between the ad breaks, but around the country in person.
To celebrate the opening of IKEA, 7 Sharp is hitting the road. To win daily IKEA prizes and a grand prize of $10,000, head to winwith7sharp.co.nz.
So why would a news show on a state-owned broadcaster become a promotional platform for the likes of IKEA? Well, the obvious answer is TVNZ needs the money, and they figure that most of the audience won't really mind much, even if the short-term gain comes at a long-term cost in trust. Well, how to get the public's trust in news back is what RNZ podcast and series executive editor Tim Watkin has pondered in a new book called How to Rebuild Trust in Journalism. He sees the relationship between the audience and the media as like a marriage on the rocks, and it's the media in the role of the cheating partner who needs to change. But what is it they need to change about themselves as they come to terms with the fact that the public are just not that into them anymore?
What's remarkable with all of that research you talk about is how consistent it is and how consistent it's been for quite a long time. The trends are really clear. It's very easy to say, look, we are well served with media in New Zealand. Our journalism is of a high standard, but people don't see that. The public generally are making some pretty serious claims about what we do. The Reuters Institute research points to the fact, and they have a quote, much of the public does not trust most of the news most of the time. That's based on research across 47 countries, and where only 40% of the people surveyed say they trust most news. Edelman does its research across 28 countries. 64% say journalists purposely mislead people. And here in New Zealand, RNZ is at the top of the trust tree, but we're still only getting about half of the people reliably trusting us. I think that speaks to a burning platform. I think this is serious. If we fail to take it seriously, then the news business might start running out of public to serve and might not have much of a business left to do.
Yeah, so being top of that trust tree, a bit more like being on top of a trust shrub or something like that, maybe.
People have turned against us for some time now, and it's been a pretty clear trend for a generation or two. But yeah, the people have spoken.
If we take that Broadcasting Standards Authority survey on trust that came out last week, interesting findings there. Fewer than 1 in 5 who experienced a drop in trust as a result of a particular event or period report an improvement since that time. So that seems locked in for them. Conversely, the same report finds people who have experienced an event which strengthened their trust are more likely to maintain or further build on their increased levels of trust. 75% of people said that. So that would actually point to the fact that if you put this effort into trying to win it back, it's worth it if that finding is to be believed.
It is not irretrievable. But if you go back about 100 years, you go to the end of the First World War, there was a global pandemic that was hitting people. There was real social upheaval and political discord. And sound familiar? And at that time, there were a lot of commentators going, the trust in our news is falling apart. And there was a reaction to that, especially in America, but around the world. It was this thing called objectivity, that journalism decided as an industry to say we are different from public relations, we're different from government information, we stand apart, we try and write detached, factual information that describes the world as it is. And that worked pretty well for us for the best part of a century. Now, the media landscape is way more complicated, but I think the principles and the lessons are still pretty sound. So yes, we can work our way back.
Isn't it also possible that when you ask people about their trust in media, you're actually inviting or even inciting skepticism? You know, if you flip it around and say, do you still use the media daily? Do you value it in spite of your reservations? You might actually get different and more hopeful results.
It's true. If you highlight something, obviously you're going to create a situation where people start to see a problem. But I think we're well past it just being journalists or news media being able to really take any comfort from that when you've got half of people around the world saying that journalists are, misleading people on purpose. We're past giving ourselves that point of comfort, I think. And trust is a relationship. I did my research in a philosophy department at the University of Glasgow, and the philosophy of trust is that trust is around human connection and relationship. If in a relationship the other partner perceives you as a problem, then it kind of doesn't really matter what the facts are to some extent. The reality is the nature of the relationship.
Yeah, so you characterise the problem as a kind of broken relationship or maybe even a marriage that needs to be saved, and where to complicate things, the media have money problems and insecurity, which is possibly a part of marriages and relationships as well. And you say in the book, it's the news media that need to do the work of the cheating spouse. But, I mean, from the news media's perspective, why does it have to be on them? If this is an audience that's been broadly happy in decades previous and not returning these results, even though the media is not necessarily that different, they're the ones who aren't paying for news. They've been happy to get it for free and not valuing the stuff. Is it really them and not us?
It's not me, it's you. No, it's not you, it's me. There is of course a lot of blame to be shared in any relationship, and the breakdown of any relationship goes both ways. We could absolutely say, come on, public, stop cheating on us with social media, stop running off with Instagram and Facebook, and come back to your good, solid relationship with mainstream news media that actually knows how to treat you well and knows how to look after you. But the reality is that people are dallying with TikTok and all the others. And we can blame them or we can do something about it. In a world where there is a flood of information out there and nobody is complaining about having not enough information, we can control the quality of that information that we provide. So what makes the news and the journalism at the heart of that different from all this other content? We say in a lot of cases that if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck and looks like a duck, it's a duck. The problem with journalism is there are a lot of things that walk and quack and look like journalism, but they're not journalism. And we need to protect our specialty as journalists, I think, and we haven't been very good at doing that.
Well, I think one aspect of news and media that surveys show people do identify news media and journalism with is negativity, which bleeds into news avoidance and all of that. And you identified, I think the way you wrote it in the book was a persistent feeling that the media are like in it for the conflict. But I wonder, does that feel fair? Because, the media during COVID and all of that, they have to tell people about the serious and the heavy and the worrying things. People need that.
I mean, you and I know each other. You know the kind of journalism I've done. I'm by no means saying that just we need to chill and do happy, joy news. The negativity point is never at the top of the research. It is bias. It is lack of transparency. It is inaccuracy. Those are the key things. But always somewhere down the list is this sense of negativity. And I did a really interesting interview with a guy called Mark Rice Oxley, who was an editor at The Guardian, and he created a section of The Guardian called The Upside, which was trying to bring in some more solution-based constructive journalism.
Oh, he was the guy who said a newspaper summing up the last 50 years would mostly be positive, right? And to make the point that institutions working well can be a story as well as criticisms kind of corrode trust in the end.
If you chose the big global trends of the last 50 years, you would often be talking about a lack of wars or diseases being cured or, a lot of positive things. And we often miss that in the day-to-day. He told the story of his very middle-class upbringing where his father would sit by the pool at the end of the day with the sun going down over the trees and the gin and tonic in his hand going, "Oh, son, the world's going to hell in a handbasket. It's all terrible." And you're like, look at your life. It's good. Look, I don't want to minimise. We are in a cost of living crisis in a very politically divisive time. But if you look over the 50 years in which trust has really started to erode, we've actually been at a pretty good point for the human story. Part of the lack of trust in that is that people don't recognise what they see in the newspaper. They go, look, things are tough at the moment, but I'm not miserable, and yet all the news stuff I see is miserable. So I think when people talk about balance, yes, it's a balance of different points of view, but it's also a balance of tone about the news that we tell.
Well, in that spirit, let's turn away from the negativity. You have identified four, you call them superpowers, which is cute, but to help build back trust.
Thank you.
Four things. So first is objectivity, but endless and frankly quite boring debates quite a lot of the time around media about what is objectivity. Some journalists think it's not realistic to achieve or even really desirable in the end, the both sides problem. In calling it a superpower, isn't it also a sort of stick to beat the media with because it means so many different things to so many people?
I thought long and hard about this, and I played around with concepts around impartiality, but I think sometimes, journalists do need to be partial towards their communities, towards democracy, for example, towards a free press. So I think, there are other words like that. I kept coming back to objectivity. No human is an objective being. We all come with our baggage and bias. But what people don't get, and it's incredibly frustrating that we have to keep having this argument, because people using that argument just need, the message to them is, that's the point. Because people are biased, we have what we call an objective method. As a journalist, you agree to sign up to a method of way of telling a story, which means that my job is, and there's a great definition from an Iowa professor about objectivity being describing the world as it is, not as you want it to be. But let's commit to a method in the same way that scientists commit to the scientific method that, again, makes journalism distinct and shows that we are putting the interests of the citizens and the people we serve ahead of our own opinions. Because, frankly, the public does not give one hoot about our opinions.
And verification is your second superpower. So media shouldn't be publishing things they don't know that aren't true, which obviously is a standard that doesn't apply out there in the wild west of social media. But how can media actually turn that into their advantage with the audience? Do they have to sort of show their workings on verification more?
That's a really good point. The verification kind of links in with the transparency, which is the third superpower. Verification is kind of the one that we kind of take for granted, I think, sometimes. You should be able to go to mainstream journalism and know that we have, as part of our professional creed, checked things. Balance is important and will often serve, but how much better that we go beyond balance to actually verification. What we then need to do is once we've gone to that effort, we need to be transparent and show our workings to...
But if you do show the workings, though, Tim, did you run the risk of ending up like, those incredibly long food labels on American food products that no one really reads, or, the software licensing T's and C's that everyone scrolls to the end of and just says, yes, I agree. Is it the stuff that people really pay attention to?
I think as journalists, we are better at communicating than those ingredient labels. But look, when you want those ingredient labels, when you need those, they are actually useful. And as you do actually look at research around some of those ingredient labels, and they do build trust in consumer products. I'm not talking about sodium at 0.5%, kind of the equivalent of journalism, but we can certainly be a lot more open in our journalism about how many people we spoke to, who refused to comment, how long we spent on the story, why we're doing the story, explaining some of the context, again, behind the points that we're making or some of the history behind the story. There are lots of details that we could fish in. Research consistently shows the public does not understand how journalism works and does not understand how it is different from the rest of the content that's so much part of their lives these days. And so we actually have to do a much better job of saying, this is what marks us out, and this is why you can trust us more than Bill on TikTok.
And Tim, the fourth of your superpowers, that leads us right onto it, it's caring. This is not predictable. You say journalism needs to be more humble and care more about how it presents the verified and objective facts gathered in the public interest. That sounds really nice, but does it also run the risk of maybe alienating some of those people who have lost trust and who do think media care about the wrong things or share, their own values and attitudes that don't measure up with theirs, the audience, in order to build more trust?
it's not caring in a way that takes sides, that says, I care about your issue and I'm going to champion your issue. That would undermine the objectivity part of the superpower, and indeed often the verification part. It's the kind of caring that says, I was thinking about it, there are friends in your life who are those people who always tell you what you want to hear and always tell you you're right and have your back all the time. But there are those other friends who are prepared to tell you what you need to hear. And I think that's the kind of friend, the caring friend that journalism needs to be, the one who's actually honest with people. They care enough to investigate the stories. They care enough to hire people who look like me, the different ethnicities, classes, rural, urban, educated, not university educated, not university educated, care enough to actually get out in the community and report in person rather than just dealing with press releases from behind the desk, care enough to spell correctly, to have a podcast on their favourite app or a website that doesn't glitch. All of these things show that we care about the information we're providing. So that's why, caring is a tricky one, and it's definitely not about taking sides.
I mean, another persistent gripe that the research picks up, and this was in the Broadcasting Standards Authority report so recently, the blurring or maybe even the blending of fact and opinion. That's, again, not a new concern. So Gavin Ellis, former Herald editor, possibly even an editor of yours back in the day.
Former boss of mine, yep.
Yep, just slapping an analysis label, he said, on content that is peppered with, opinions of a journalist is not enough. What do you think? I mean, you used to run an opinion site of your own and pundit, so you're separating out those roles. We'll have an election next year. You might be assembling the Caucus podcast where, you have senior RNZ journalists who give their opinions on how the campaign is going. And some people might think
I'll challenge you on that.
If someone like Gavin is saying the public are seeing senior journalists giving their own opinion, the analysis versus opinion thing doesn't work for them, and it's undermining trust.
It's a fair point, and in my some of my recommendations from my research, I've suggested, for example, that opinion pages on sites could be kept off the news pages. They could be changed to a different colour, the kind of a backwash colour, so that it's much clearer. He's right, just slapping analysis on the front doesn't cut it. Maybe using a different font. I think we need to be really overly just demonstrative in showing where the difference is. This is an article of factually checked news. This is an opinion piece where someone is based on facts but doesn't have to be balanced because it's their opinion and it's their so we need to be much better at distinguishing between those two, because you're right, people just don't see the difference. On Caucus, we're really careful, and we can probably do better on the transparency front, but we're really careful not to take sides, not to be partisan. We offer analysis, and we use decades of experience covering politics to try and give people some context and some quality information and some insight from our experience. But we police ourselves really hard about not saying, I think, blah, 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 or this is my opinion, or because, again, no one cares about our reckons. With the transparency thing, we need to work much harder. For example, in this conversation, we should probably be really transparent that you're part of the podcast team at RNZ that I lead, so technically I'm your boss. You made the decision to do this interview on your own. You can edit me in any way you want to. You would treat me like you would any other guest. You are completely free and independent to do what you want with this information that I'm offering you.
And when it comes to another gripe the surveys pick up, media often get criticised for ignoring or marginalising certain views, certain groups. I think earlier you referred to perhaps too narrow a range of sources. Do you think that is a problem in New Zealand, that changing that, broadening that would help build trust?
It seems to. There's quite a few, again, when you go through the research and you see a lot of workshops and focus groups and so forth, they often get frustrated that they listen to the news and it doesn't sound like them or look like them. And that's, diversity in the broader sense. It's really interesting in America that 23% of journalists in the US live in 3 cities, New York, DC, and LA. How do you cover the breadth of that complex country when a quarter of your journalists are in just 3 cities? And I think New Zealand probably suffers from a similar thing, that Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch probably dominate. The local media is usually the most trusted media, again, because people see that they care, they see that they're part of their community. Most journalists these days do a university degree in journalism or something similar. And that straight away creates a certain bias in the way people view the world. And so we probably need to be better at finding people from all walks of life who can come and tell stories and help us understand, because they bring an understanding of the world with them, right? They bring a worldview, they bring a context list, they bring a whole bunch of ideas that if we are too narrow in the kind of people who we hire or the people we interview, then we just miss a lot of the worldview, and people go, this isn't the world that I know. Why should I trust you? Trust is built on wide, diverse relationships.
And when it comes to calling the media to account, which is something, of course, that could, or the knowledge that happens, is a factor in public trust, or should be. It suggested, I think, in the book at one point that the regulators that we have could be, and this is the metaphor of the broken relationship, something like marriage counsellors for the relationship. But they really are compliance officers, aren't they? They actually have to enforce rather than be there to bring people together. And you're on the Media Council, one of those regulators, so you confront that all the time.
Oh, this book is being sent to media regulators around the world, part of the grant that, again, for transparency's sake, part of the grant that I got from the British government for this work meant that this work has to be shared with media regulators. If you see that relationship between journalism and the public as a relationship, those media regulators are ensuring compliance of certain standards and principles. But the point of those principles, the point of those standards, is to make sure that the relationship is healthy. So I think the two go hand in hand. They are there to ensure a healthy, robust relationship. If you look at the trust from a counselling kind of point of view, and I read a few papers in this space, marriage counsellors talk about over disclosure when you're trying to rebuild trust, about extreme eliminating secrecy and extreme openness and this kind of thing, which all is very similar to the advice that we get from the public, saying that they want more transparency and to understand journalism better, and for us to work harder at our relationship. The language is really similar to marriage counselling languages.
Well, let's just say that, media executives, editors, journalists, regulators all read How to Rebuild Trust in Journalism by Tim Watkin cover to cover, accept the argument, identify those four superpowers. Say, well, let's amp up those superpowers. In, let's say, 5 years' time, what do you think the picture could look like?
Echo chambers will continue to exist. Malign actors will continue to try and drag down and call out even the best journalists as biased and so forth. And I think, the public does have a role in that regard to actually be a bit more ruthless in the way they view some of the critics of the media. It's very easy just to join the chorus of the media are all blah, 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 and actually go, you know what, most of the media aren't. Most of the media are actually damn good people who serve the public well. But to go back to that Reuters Institute quote that much of the public don't trust most of the news most of the time, hopefully in 5 years we might get to the point where much of the public trust most of the news most of the time. And I think we'll be rewarded with that, with people going, you know what, I can count on those guys, I can't count on those other guys. And we want to be the information specialists in your life that you can count on.
An alternative negative ending, let's be in it for the conflict, media executives, journalists, regulators don't read and dismiss How to Rebuild Trust in Journalism by Tim Watkin, and there is no coordinated action or effort over the next 5 years to rebuild trust.
I can't imagine this world, Colin. What a terrible world to be living in.
What are the consequences, though, of not acting on this do you think the result might be in, say, 5 years from now?
I think the idea of a shared reality and information that we can trust becomes more distant. The commercial model of media gets much harder to justify. I know there's a lot of people in media who are really torn between giving the people what they want rather than what they need, and we're going to keep the lights on for another month and pay the bills by maybe compromising on some trust issues. I guess my thought is we're past that, the first step. If we don't start making those hard long-term choices, then in 5 years we see continued shrinkage. News Hub is gone. The Herald is maybe a third of the size of the newsroom when I worked there under Gavin Ellis. That continues. If we don't get that right, that continues. On one level, we're just another job in this world. But if we lose that quality, trusted sharing of information. The historian Yuval Harari talks about that as our species' great competitive advantage, the information network. If we lose the ability to trust that information, then we actually are in a really bad place as a species. So I really hope, regardless of my book, that people at least start thinking seriously about the importance of who they, trust and who they don't trust, and making good choices, and for journalists to actually work really hard at earning that trust.
That was Tim Watkin, the executive editor of podcasts and series here at RNZ, Mediawatch among them, as you heard, and he's also a member of the Media Council, which considers formal complaints about non-broadcast media, and he's the author of How to Rebuild Trust in Journalism, just published by BWB Texts, number 112 in a series of short books on big subjects for Aotearoa New Zealand. Now, another of those back in 2019 was also about the current and future state of journalism. That was The Broken Estate, Journalism and Democracy in a Post-Truth World, and it was by Melanie Bunce, who, coincidentally, we heard from last weekend here on Mediawatch. She's a New Zealand journalist who's now the director of a new Centre of Media and Democracy at London's City St George's University, which is also researching trust in news around the world. And last week, Dr. Bunce told me there are problems with trust here that aren't unique to us.
If you get three different people telling you they don't trust the media, they might have three different reasons. And for one person, it might be because, they don't agree with the emphasis that's occurring within coverage of, say, an issue like Gaza, conflict in Israel. For someone else, it might be because their favourite politician has criticised this media and they kind of trust that politician, so they follow that line of reasoning. And for a third, it might be a different reason. So it's a really hard one to counteract. One thing we do know, which gives me a lot of faith, at least I try to have faith in it as an optimist, is that I think in a crisis, when there is an attack or there is a pandemic, or I suspect in New Zealand during the storms, when recently, you've had these bad storms that I've been following on the media, when people want to actually know what's happened, where can I go for help? How bad is this? Who's been affected? They do overwhelmingly still go to the mainstream media, even when they say they don't trust those organisations or that legacy media. So it kind of suggests at some deep down level, we do, when we really need accurate reporting, go and refer to those organisations rather than trying to, glean information from social media or sound bites.
Yeah, and then there's also, coming out of the survey, people who profess to have problems with trust in the media are also acknowledging that a lot of the time it's because what they're seeing doesn't reflect their own opinions of what the media ought to be delivering to them.
100%.
I've got a trust problem with the media, but I acknowledge it's partly because it's not telling me the things I think are right. What is the media supposed to do with that kind of finding if they want to rebuild trust? Because they can't cater for everybody's point of view.
Here in the UK, the BBC is kind of wrapping itself in knots, for example, around the coverage of Gaza and Israel, as it did during, its reporting of Brexit, because people are trying to perform their balance and their impartiality, but then you perhaps end up, giving a lot of space to a side of the argument or an interpretation of the argument that your audience at home doesn't think should have any oxygen given to it whatsoever. So it's incredibly hard. I think you need to explain to the audience as much as possible that you are trying to give due impartiality, to give the airspace and the attention to the sides based on the kind of where the evidence lies. But it's not easy. And it starts most crucially, I would say, with not encouraging or pushing back when political elites attack the news, because they usually have a vested interest in doing that. And a lot of the growth and distrust in the media over the last decade or so has resulted quite directly from political elites attacking and discrediting the media. Not giving the media a free ride or anything. I mean, you've got to regulate and hold journalists to account, of course. But we should always wonder what's in it for a political elite when they are saying you can't trust that news and that fake news media.
Yeah, another thing that came out in this report here in New Zealand was the way news is shareable now. Individual items or opinion pieces from outlet X or Y can be shared. and people read those and tend to think of them in isolation, whereas they're often reacting to single atomized, morselized bits of content that rub them up the wrong way, whereas, all the other things that the same outlet and or others might be publishing on the same topic are just not in their minds when they make a judgment.
And actually, I think it's more of a problem in many countries outside New Zealand than it is in New Zealand, because we're actually very lucky in New Zealand that there's high readership of local news. That genuinely is not the case in the UK. I mean, I live in London, one of the world's global cities. There's very little in the way of news coverage of my borough, even though it's larger than Dunedin, my hometown. I can't read the equivalent of the Otago Daily Times about the place that I live, even though I live in London, because of just how the media ecosystem here works. And so actually New Zealand has relatively high levels of non-partisan print media consumption still. It's going down, but it's still there. But yeah, as it continues to go down, this will be an increasing concern, I suspect. I mean, not only are you getting the news item morselized and as a standalone, as you say, but you might only see the headline, or even more commonly, you might not see anything if you're only getting it on social media. And then you might think to yourself, oh, this is an important issue, or why is no one reporting this thing that I think is an important issue? That maybe the news is, and that can kind of be something that fosters, conspiratorial thinking a little bit as well, because you think there isn't coverage of this topic that you think is important. But actually, there is. It's just not reaching you.
Melanie Bunce, formerly a journalist here, who's now a professor of journalism and the director of the new Centre of Media and Democracy at London's City St George's University, which is also researching trust in news all around the world. As we heard on Mediawatch last weekend, Melanie Bunce's new Centre for Media and Democracy was launched in London with the help of Emily Maitlis, a former BBC TV News presenter who's now pretty famous for a BBC interview she did back in 2019.
I have no recollection of ever meeting this lady. None whatsoever.
You don't remember meeting her?
No.
So you're absolutely sure that you're at home on the 10th of March?
Yeah.
She was very specific about that night.
Mm-hmm.
She described dancing with you and you profusely sweating, and that she went on to have bath, possibly.
There's a slight problem with the sweating because I have a peculiar medical condition, which is that I don't sweat.
Prince Andrew, as he was then, talking to Emily Maitlis on the BBC's Newsnight show back in 2019 and telling her that he had ended his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein 9 years earlier, though that was contradicted by evidence that's emerged recently. Emily Maitlis is now part of a successful podcast called The News Agents, which this week dug into some of the media management involved in King Charles expelling his brother from the royal family.
On Thursday of last week, crews were called to Royal Lodge for a passing traffic camera shot. What did that mean? It meant that newsrooms were alerted that there might be a shot of interest if they wanted to send a camera crew down to Royal Lodge at about 8 o'clock last Thursday. And in the end, it got too big. As we know, there were sort of too many crews there. There was a chopper, there was a helicopter, and the announcement or the shot itself was pulled. What did that mean? It meant that King Charles had imagined driving through or up to the gates or through the gates of Royal Lodge to basically read his brother, Prince Andrew, the Riot Act. And the palace decided that it was called off because it all felt too much.
And also drawing on years of coverage of the scandal was the long-standing satire magazine Private Eye, whose current cover says the Grand Old Duke of Yuck has been given the Royal Order of the Boot. And in its latest podcast called Page 94, Private Eye's society correspondent Helen Lewis revealed this was also bad news for her own brother.
My poor brother, turns out he looks quite a lot like Prince Andrew. Luckily, he's in New Zealand, so it's fine. They don't have the newspapers there. Anyway, so I feel a personal involvement in this as a satellite branch of the Yorks.
Well, we do, of course, have our own papers here, if not theirs, and there's been plenty about the so-called Andy scandal in them. And the day that he was stripped of his titles, it even filled the first 10 minutes of One News at 6.
A string of scandals and sordid, even criminal allegations fill the gaps between Andrew's journey from war hero to royal reject. Ryan Boswell looks at where it all went wrong for the former prince.
But the Private Eye podcast crew in London was across a local angle that no one saw coming.
So we know he'll be moving house. I mean, he may be moving to New Zealand. It's possible your brother will be getting some lookalike work before too long. Don't know how much in demand that's going to be.
What party? What corporate event?
Well, Halloween.
And Helen Lewis's instincts were right. The market here for a Mr. Mountbatten Windsor lookalike would be pretty small, even at Halloween. On Midweek Mediawatch this week, our weekly catch-up with Knights on RNZ National, I looked at someone else at the centre of a long-running controversy who's had a pretty busy media week, Silver Ferns coach Dame Nolene Taurua.
We want the truth, but it seems netball believes we can't handle the truth. Quite odd, really. Dame Nolene Taurua wouldn't know what she's done wrong, and there was no investigation.
I also took a look at the police backing away from taking stuff to court over airing audio of the pursuit of fugitive Tom Phillips back in September, but warning anyone else in the media tempted to do something else in future that they shouldn't. And we looked at why the NBR threatened to go legal on some of its own subscribers, including, ironically, a firm of lawyers. That's all in this week's Midweek Media Watch, also available in our podcast feed if you missed it. I'll be back again next Wednesday with Midweek Media Watch at about 8:30 on Nights with Emile Donovan. But in the meantime, that's it for this weekend. Thanks so much for listening. If you have any thoughts for us or ideas for us to follow up or any hints of what we can do to recover your trust, do get in touch. Email us at mediawatch@rnz.co.nz. You'll also find us on Mediawatch NZ on X, and you can even write us an old-fashioned letter and send it to PO Box 123 Wellington. Catch you again next Wednesday. In the meantime, follow Mediawatch and listen on any podcast app to make sure you never miss an episode.